Hello there and welcome to my channel. I'm dropping this video on January the 2nd of 2026, and that's significant because that's 1,000 days since I dropped my very first video on this channel. In that almost 3-year period, I have done videos predominantly around e-ink note-taking, but I've covered related topics as well, anywhere from art to phones to all-in-one PCs and all points in between. This video is going to represent my last video for this channel. It's time for me to move on. So in this video, we're going to talk about it. I've got broken up into chapters. I've got my notes here to make sure I stay focused, and I've got my glass of wine. So we're going to go ahead and have a fun journey talking about how we got to this point, what it was like on the journey, and everything about the channel. This is my last video, and we're going to have a good time talking about the journey to get to this point. All right, let's dig on in. All right, let's start with some quick stats about my channel, and we'll go deeper into some of these in a later chapter. But basically, as I close out my channel, I have over 5,000 subscribers, over 200 videos posted, again, over almost 3 years, and over 1.2 million views. So I'm really happy with what I was able to do with this channel. And I really consider my run a success, at least in terms of my own personal perspective. Now, in terms of how we got here to the end specifically, it was a little over a year ago that I really started to feel like, it wasn't quite as fun making videos, and that, what I was thinking about what the end game was. Now, I was still enjoying it, but I knew that there was a shelf life to the work that I was doing. And so, at the end of 2024, I basically set some goals for myself. And I said, well, if I can hit 5,000 subscribers and 1 million views, then that's pretty much going to be it. And that'll be indicating when it's time to wrap up. And as you saw with the stats, I was able to achieve that. I'll dig a little bit deeper into the goals because there was a little bit of a journey there and a low point in the year as it relates to those. So we'll talk about that later. But in this particular chapter, I just want to focus on the why. Why am I closing the channel now? And I'm going to rank a few things in order of importance. The very first thing being the most important, and they'll decrease as we go through that. And that basically explains how I got to this point. So the first thing I want to talk about, the headlining reason, is I will call diminishing returns. So this is basically the idea that, when I first started filming and I first started getting into this, it was exciting, everything was new, you're on the beginning of a learning adventure. And I've really developed a lot over time. I mean, the amount of skills that I've acquired in terms of lighting, in terms of sound, in terms of editing, and I can go on, has been great. And I've really enjoyed it. And I've really developed over these almost 3 years. But what's been happening is as time goes on, it's kind of become less rewarding, but the level of work still remains. And it is a ton of work. I don't have an exact statistic on this, but it would not surprise me that for every hour of video I end up publishing and releasing, there's 5 hours of preparation for that. If it's not just thinking about what it is I'm reviewing and thinking about what I'm going to shoot and, all the context around that, and then the actual filming and then the actual editing and all the stuff that goes into making a video, is actually quite significant. Even for videos like mine, which are not particularly heavily produced, it still takes just a ton of effort, again, particularly in the preparation part. So that was really kind of my primary driver for wanting to stop. It's been done, basically, and I wasn't getting a lot. I was still developing, on a lot of the basics. I would consider myself, coming into this channel, I was very much a beginner in terms of, videography, for lack of a better term. And I think I'm coming out kind of at the upper end of the intermediate band. I'm certainly not advanced. There's no question about that. But I've learned a ton. And so, at this point, the juice isn't worth the squeeze anymore. At this point, it's kind of like, yeah, I've been done and I'm kind of ready to move on. So that's the number one reason. Number two would be around competition. I didn't really know this much at the time, but when I started my channel, there really were only a couple voices in e-ink note-taking. And so I saw an opportunity there and I kind of jumped on in. And what I would later realize is I was coincidentally the beginning of kind of a movement of people coming onto YouTube and doing something similar. And so now there's a lot of voices out there, and there are a lot of good voices too. But that means you're competing for the same type of viewership, the same type of eyeballs. And it's just becoming harder and harder, and that environment is just continuing to grow. It seems like every few months we see a new player in the space. So the competition's making everything harder already, and there's really no what you might call barriers to entry. I mean, all you need is a camera, some passion, and the willingness to do it, and you can jump right on in. And for a channel like mine, which is successful but still quite small, there's really no defense against competition, right? There's no reason why, a new person couldn't come in tomorrow and do work that's better than mine and then, pull my viewers that way. So competition, I think, is another big factor of why it's probably a good time to wrap things up. So that would be the second reason. The third reason is, I've tried throughout, particularly the course of this year, of doing different things, of trying to kind of expand, my horizons in terms of the types of videos that I was producing. And, early on in the beginning of the year, I wasn't clear in my mind whether I was going to close things down or whether I was going to completely go in a different direction with the channel. And it was only about halfway through the year where like, no, let's go ahead and just end this cold turkey. But part of the experimentation I did earlier in the year is trying different things and seeing how those would play out and what kind of interest I would get. And there really wasn't any interest. So it really kind of helps solidify for me the fact that there wasn't really anything more for me to mine, no new avenues that I wanted to go down that would also be of interest to viewers as well, at least not to the community that I had collected. So, I could start over, I guess, but I just don't want to start over. So anyway, you get the idea. I didn't really feel like I could branch out and do anything new, and I was kind of done with what I was doing. So that's the third reason. I guess the fourth reason I'll point out, and we'll go into detail in this in the finance section of the video, but it is a money pit. I mean, it's a hobby, and I knew that going in. I knew that I was going to spend more money than I was going to take in by far, and that's certainly the case. And I was great with that. There was no problem, no regrets over the last, almost 3 years of doing that. But at this point, looking forward, do I want to continue to make that type of investment? And again, the money itself, this is number 4. So it's not the primary reason why I'm stopping. But in conjunction with the other things that I've just mentioned, it just doesn't make any sense to keep this going. It's just too expensive of a hobby. And I could use that money for something else. I've only got one life and I have to make a decision. There's always an opportunity cost with your resources, your time, and your money. And in my particular case, it's time to explore those other opportunities, whatever those end up being. The last thing I'll throw into the mix, and something I just have to personally acknowledge, is that my approach to everything, while it's certainly something that I'm kind of proud of and I don't regret, definitely kind of made things very hard and very niche for me. So I would be remiss if I didn't note that I made my own personal decisions along the way that did create a very narrowly focused channel, that did create a very focused way of approaching the channel. And all of that has kind of factored into where we are today. So I have to say, my own decisions have also played a heavy role, unbeknownst to me at the time, of how we've ended up here at this point. So those are all the main reasons that I would point to as why this time is right to cancel the channel. And I guess to summarize it and to put a bow on it, it's time. And I had a great run, and I'm super happy with what we've accomplished here on this channel. By the way, I say we a lot in these videos. I'm the we. I'm the only person. I don't know why I do that. It's just something I naturally do, as opposed to saying I. So that'll happen throughout this video, as it has throughout other videos I've recorded. No, when I say we, I mean I. But anyway, it's time to wrap things up, and it's a great time, I think. And that's how we ended up in this place. All right. So next I want to talk about what it was like to be a creator for the YouTube channel. And I've done reviews in the past on my channel, but I've never really talked about this. And I think one of the main things that I've really gotten out of this is an opportunity to be a voice, to someone that can build up an expertise around these e-ink note-taking, put out videos, and have that have an impact. It's a small impact. I don't think there's any question about that, but nevertheless, definitely an impact. And I remember before doing the videos, I would share information, say on Reddit, or I would make a post on Reddit, and in one of these forums, and that post, would get a few views, sometimes would be pretty successful, relatively speaking, but invariably, and sometimes quite quickly, that post just completely disappears as new posts come in. And so you're in an ocean of people who are basically, doing their own commentary. And so it just felt like, even though I like Reddit, and I definitely appreciate many of the forums, particularly related to e-ink, it's hard to get your voice out there, to have an impact. And I thought the YouTube channel allowed me to do that in a way that a place like Reddit didn't. So that was part of the fun. Another bit of the fun was just following the stats, following how many subscribers I had, how many views I were getting, looking at the stats for each video, helping people out. That was really a big piece of what I was hoping to do, not just to present my own opinions, but to really help people and to give people information. In fact, I've always felt that, my opinion was kind of like window dressing, but my videos ideally were set up where you could, take or leave my opinion, but you were still getting good information on what the devices were and what they could do. And that's why I did so many top-down views of devices in action, so that people can just make their own determination. That was more important to me, actually, than my own opinion, although it was definitely important for me to share my opinions as well, and I really enjoyed doing that. So that was the fun of it, and those are the things I really got out of it. But I would be remiss in giving you an incomplete picture if I didn't say that there were some negatives that came with that as well. Like anxiety is one example, and I'm not, the best looking guy. I certainly don't have the best voice. I'm not the most animated or interesting person to listen to for long stretches of a time. Perhaps that's why I'm drinking wine on this video, just to kind of make things a little more interesting than they otherwise would be. But nevertheless, there are video shoots where I'm just super unhappy with it, and I don't feel like my performance was that great. And a lot of times I end up convincing myself, just release the video, because you've got the content is there, the substance is there, it's just the style isn't. And, there's a lot of things I like. Are people going to catch on that? Are people going to comment on that? And I think, to viewers' credit, they either didn't catch on or they didn't comment on it, which I appreciate. But I'm just pointing out that there's a lot of anxiety there that can come. Not every video was like that. I didn't always feel that way, but you definitely have times when you just look at your performance and you just say, screw it, I'm going to release this video anyway, despite how I might be coming across. So that's one negative thing. And then there was also frustration. And this is something that I've heard other YouTubers talk about, so it's not unique to me. But you can work on a project and you can be just like so excited about it, and you put tons of preparation work in it, and you think you've got a good angle on something, and you think it's interesting, and maybe this is the video that takes off, and so often it doesn't. So often the amount of passion does not equal the results. Those are two separate things. So there was definitely a lot of frustration in making videos that you thought, well, maybe this is going to do something and gain some traction, and they just don't go anywhere. And so that's definitely one aspect that again, I think a lot of YouTubers share, is this disconnect between popularity of videos and the passion and interest that goes into them. They just don't equal each other. I could work and do a really sloppy video and that thing can shoot off and be popular, or I could be an incredibly intense and thoughtful video and it goes nowhere. That's just a fact of life on YouTube. And again, I've heard other YouTubers talk about it, and I've certainly experienced that myself. One thing that I think is super important to understand is just how much of a grind it is to make videos. It's nothing goes viral. Nothing just blows up in views. Now, I have one exception to that, but that is related to ads, so we'll talk about that later. But in terms of the actual, I'm just going to film a video, I'm going to put it out there, the predictability of YouTube is actually pretty amazing. I can't say it's perfect. I can't say I can have tremendous precision in saying how a particular video will do. But you can definitely see, particularly over time, particularly over multiple videos, that there's pretty much just a set amount of performance that you can expect. And there's just not a lot of variance to that. And so I would argue that the entirety of my channel has been just grinding and getting a little more viewers, a little more subscribers. And that's never changed. I don't have a graphic to share on this, but if you look at my growth in subscribers, it's like a 45-degree angle line. And there's just a little bit of wobbliness in that line, but that's about it. So it really is just, you produce videos, you get the same result. And sometimes that grind is fun. Sometimes that grind is part of the fun of it. But other times, it is a little bit depressing that you don't get some more variability and some more things popping when you don't expect it to pop and what have you. But definitely just a ton of work, even for videos like mine, again, which are light on the production values. They still take a lot of time to put together. I think I had one person early on talk about my videos in terms of being low effort, and I cannot say that's farther from the truth. Like, the amount of time that I put into these videos actually is quite extraordinary, and it's one of the factors why it really is time to wrap things up. But anyway, we'll put that on a shelf. It's been talked about already. I guess the last thing, and I kind of talked about this in the previous chapter, is I just grew tremendously. Every year I improved on, lighting, sound, production. I've used multiple. I started off using, I think, Cyberlink Power Director, if I have that name right, and I moved on to Final Cut Pro, which I actually think is better, although both are good. Both are really good editing software. I've had multiple cameras. I started off with a Sony, I think it's like a ZV-1, I think, and now I've got a Lumix. This is a Lumix GH5 Mach 2, I think, something like that. And just I've tried so many different lighting rigs and so many different microphone solutions, and I just learned a lot. I'm just a much better person in terms of my content creation than I was when I started. And you can go back. I started off with a Pixel phone, and I would film stuff and then directly post onto YouTube. That's where the channel started. And going from that to where we are now and how I set up the studio and how I do, the lighting, sound, again, all that has been dramatic. And there's still more room to grow in that regard, I know, but I've definitely grown a lot over these years. And that's one of the things I'm proud of. So anyway, hopefully all that paints a little bit of a picture of the highs and the lows of just the day-to-day of running the channel. It was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of work, and I just can't emphasize that enough. All right, I'm going to need a little bit more wine for this chapter, because I'm going to focus on myself and what I think of myself as a YouTube creator, particularly in this e-ink note-taking space. I don't normally, I'm not a great advocate for myself. I don't normally do self-promotion very well, so I'm sure this will come across a bit on the clumsy side, but I just want to say it for the record. I'm very proud of what I've done on this channel. I'm proud of the approach that I took and how I executed on that approach. I consider myself to be, relatively speaking, an objective reviewer. We all have our own biases and our own slants and what we bring to the world. So no one can be truly objective in maybe kind of the academic sense of the word. But I really have tried at least to be consistent, to try to be as fair and as open as possible. And I think, for the most part, I was able to achieve it. Of course, I have my own slant based on how I actually use these devices, which is what I tend to focus on, as opposed to some of the other use cases, which I'm not as familiar with. So it's not perfect by any stretch, but I think that I've done a generally good job. This will come across probably a little bit arrogant, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I don't think that there's any other YouTuber in the e-ink reviewer space like me. Now, I'm not saying I'm the best, by the way. I'm not making a claim on that at all. There's better ones before me, and there'll be better ones to come. But what I'm saying is that, basically the combination of things and my approach to the channel was fairly unique, and I'm not quite sure there's anyone that kind of matches that. Now, I'm going to go over a few of the reasons why, and you'll probably go over that and listen to them and go, well, no, I can think of someone that has that aspect or someone that has another aspect. And that's probably true. It's the combination is what I'm focusing on that's unique, maybe not the individual pieces. So what do I mean? Well, let's just start from the beginning. I love the ink technology. I still vividly remember when I was in a Fry store turning the corner and seeing this kiosk for the Sony PRS 505. That was an e-reader that, in this case, was 2007, that was there to be able to be purchased. And I remember thinking, my God, that's exactly what I've been looking for. To give you a little bit of context, Project Gutenberg had really just kind of been up and running, and you could read books for free on your computer. And I always thought that was a fantastic idea, but my God, who would want to actually read a novel on a computer? It's not a place for comfortable reading. I saw that as a huge problem. And here was an e-ink device that totally solved that problem. And not only did that, but would prove, at least in my opinion, to be way better than books. And I love books, you can tell by the bookshelves. But the portability, the front lighting, the just everything about e-reading on e-ink, I think is a superior experience for reading. And so I just fell in love with the technology when I first saw it way back then, which is almost 20 years ago, I guess. So I have that. I have that love for e-ink. I just like it a lot, and I want to help other people. And that's the other aspect. A major way I ran my channel is, how do I give information to people so that they can help make their own buying decision? I never had the angle of, I think you should buy this device, or I think you should buy this device. Of course, I shared my preferences. But what I really cared about, again, is that love of e-ink. So more than anything, I wanted the viewer to get something that was good for them. And even if it was a device I didn't like the Scribe is a great example. A lot of people love the Scribe. I think the Scribe is, a pretty basic device and that you can do better than the Scribe. But if you're someone that has the Scribe and you're super happy with it, then I'm happy for you and you're good. I'm not making money on what people buy. I just love the tech and I want to connect as many people as I can to that tech. And I think that makes me fairly unique in that regard. The last thing I'll point out is I did spend, my own personal money on making this channel happen. So I never was sponsored by anyone. I never did affiliate links except for one particular instance. And even that one instance, it wasn't about making money. It was about, trying to help a company that I thought deserved support and had been kind of maligned, unfortunately, and inaccurately by another YouTuber and on Reddit. So I felt that, by doing affiliates for that company, that was Viwoods, I was kind of a counterbalance to all that unwarranted negativity. And I'd like to think in a small way that I helped them get past that. And they're a fairly major player, all things considered today. And I think that I played a role in helping with that, which I'm very, very proud of. So again, I don't take any money. I have taken free devices, but I'm very transparent about that. They're not free to me, by the way. I still pay taxes on those, but we'll cover that in the finance section. But yes, I think the combination of those things, my love of e-ink, wanting to help people, you were the customer. The viewer was always my customer, not the manufacturers, not the people trying to sell things. And my own approach of financing my own channel almost entirely, except of course for YouTube revenue, pretty much. That made me a unique and I think a good reviewer and a good resource for people who are interested in this tech. And I just don't think there's anyone that has that exact same type of background and attributes they bring to the table. So I really do think that what I was doing was unique and it was helpful to have. And that will be missed. I think there will be a hole. And other people are going to fill it in different ways, right? It's not, the world's going to go on, right? But I do think that I brought something special to the table, and I'm very proud of that. The last thing I'll say is I do think that I've influenced other YouTubers as well. And I don't think the influence has been huge, by the way. I think it's been pretty small, kind of on the periphery. But I have seen myself phrase things in certain videos and then seen that repeated by other YouTubers. And I kind of take that with a badge of honor. Some of those things may be coincidental. That's certainly possible. But I've seen enough of it to know that, yeah, I think I've had a little bit of an influence, and that's really cool. I really didn't expect that coming in, and so I'm pretty proud of that. But I'm mostly proud of how I approached the channel and how I stayed true to what I wanted to do from the beginning, which is basically serve the viewer. I want to talk a little bit about this past year because kind of one of my low points of doing the channel actually happened back in September. And to kind of set that stage, I basically set a couple goals, as I mentioned earlier in the video. I wanted to get 5,000 subscribers, which I knew I would get. I was fairly comfortable that I was going to achieve that mark, and that actually turned out to be true. But I also set the goal of getting 1 million views, and I knew that that was an aggressive goal to try to get to by the end of 2025. And actually, at the time I set that goal, I had done estimates, and I realized that it was possible that that could happen, but there was also this chance that I would have to wait, maybe go and extend my channel further into 2026, maybe into January or into February, in order to achieve that mark. Now, what I didn't appreciate was that the peak of my channel had occurred basically between September and January of 24 going into 25. And we'll see this later as we kind of share some statistics and some graphs on the channel. But basically, it was the heyday. It might have been the most interesting time to date, and maybe will be for a while, in e-ink note-taking. There were 5 devices released, and views were incredibly high. And so when I thought about the future, I thought, well, that should continue. Maybe it'll go down a little bit, but I should be able to get to at least 900,000 views by the end of the year, and then or maybe even better. Maybe I'll even get to goal. And that didn't happen. Now, the first problem was that in the first 2 years of my channel, around the June time period, Books released first the Books Mini Tab C or something like that, Tab Mini C, and then the following year, they go 10.3. And both of those devices were really popular. They were very successful for my channel in terms of views. That didn't happen. There really was no release by Books this year in that time frame. So that caused a little bit of depression in terms of views. But specifically though, when the first kind of marquee release of the holiday season, which would be the Remarkables, the Move device, when that came out, that's really the first signal that things were not going to go as well as I'd hoped. And in fact, the channel, while growing, was growing much less than it had done in the previous year. And I've got a graphic here which I can share with you that kind of shows that. So this is basically looking at 2 videos, the unboxing or hardware impressions video, and then the visual tour. And it's looking at what those view numbers were after the first week for the Remarkable Paper Pro in 2024, and then the Move in 2025. And you can see that, the total views in 24 were over 11,000, but for the same period, the Move was like dramatically less, just under 5,000 views for that device. And both were kind of hot releases. You can argue that the Move wasn't as big as the Paper Pro because it had been a number of years from the Paper Pro to the Remarkable 2, so it was a bigger news that was being released. But other YouTubers were doing better with the Move than I was. And this was the first real clear understanding that my growth trends were dramatically different than I'd hoped. It was kind of a depressing moment, actually, to realize that. And this is what caused me to start looking at ads, actually. And I'll have a whole chapter on that. The only reason why I made my view goal was because I got ads. I hit the 900,000 mark, which I thought I would when I originally made my goals. But that was because of the help of these ads. And then there was a quirk to that too, which was kind of interesting. But this was the first signal that the channel just was not going to continue growing at the rate it had been growing. And of course, I'd already made the decision to close the channel at this point, but I had hoped to finish strong. And so that's what made this so hard. And this was the time when I basically said, well, maybe we won't have views as the metric I'm going for. Maybe I'll release 250 videos, and that'll be the goal that I'll be looking for. And so I changed my expectations, but it was still a bit of a downer to see the channel slow down. And furthermore, that was reinforced as the Note Air 5C was released. And you can see on this table, as we compare again, in this case, we're looking at 3 video types: the hardware and unboxing, the visual tour, but also the review, and what those views were a week in. And the 5C is the least of the 3 devices. So you can see the 3C, we had 11,000 views, went up to 13,600 for the 4C, and then it dropped down a 75% or 25% drop from the 4C to the 5C a year later. And all of these are signs of a channel that was slowing down, that the momentum that I'd kind of taken for granted going into the end of 2024 was gone. Again, the channel's still growing, but the rate of growth had decreased pretty dramatically. So this wasn't, anything that helped make the decision to close the channel, because that decision was made 9 months previous to these events. But these events did really help solidify, in my mind, the fact that, and again, I think the competition factors in here as well, as I talked about in the first chapter, that the channel was done. It was time to move on, not just for myself, but that the opportunities in the market were going to be decreasing. So it wasn't just me in the end that made the decision to close the channel, but it was just the idea that the channel itself was starting to organically reach its own conclusion. So a little bit of a bummer, not quite the way I'd hoped to end things, but we still ended up ending quite strong. And I was, thankfully to the ads, able to meet my view goal. So it all worked out, but it definitely was a low point for me as I was trying to wrap up my channel this year. Okay, so in the previous chapter, I talked about in order to make my view goal, I had to use ads to get views. And this was within YouTube. And I'd never used ads before. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, talk about what that meant for me and my channel. And then I'll give a little bit of insight, I think, for other people, other creators who might be thinking about using ads as well. So this is at least one perspective on that topic. Now, I ended up doing 4 ad campaigns in total, and I'll put that up on the screen here. So there's 4 videos that I did. It started with the Remarkable Move review videos. I did 2 videos for 2 different audiences on that device, and those ads ran simultaneously. One ran a little bit of a shorter time period, the other a little bit longer. And this is where I learned that longer ads basically did a little bit better than shorter ads in terms of how long the campaign went, is what I mean. So here are basically, all the impressions that Google provided, the views they ended up getting, and they even had a little bit of subscriber growth related to that. So those were the campaigns. The second campaign I ran was the top 5 e-ink device makers ranked. That was an interesting one because I thought that maybe that might lead people to look at the first part of that series, which was ranking 6 to 10. That didn't happen. Nobody went into the description of the top 5 and clicked on the link to the other video. So there was no transference of that at all. And then finally, the 2025 e-ink Note-Taking Awards. That one has tons of links in there, and I thought that might generate views as well, also be more of a general interest video, and that didn't turn out to pass, although this is the one that went kind of viral, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But overall, what the ads did for me is they did allow me to reach my view goal. It provided over 300,000 views over a 3-week period when it was all over. I ended up spending about $1,500 or so on the ads. So I spent quite a bit of money on these. And, am I happy that I spent that much money? I actually am, because I was so emotionally invested in this view goal. Let me pause for a second. One thing to understand from a creator perspective is views are the coin of the realm. Subscribers are important too, and there's something to that. There's a status to having a certain number of subscribers, but ultimately revenue is based on views, and how people are interested in your work is based on views. So you become heavily focused on views more than any other statistic. So that's partly why it was such an important statistic for me. And this is where the ads were helpful. The ads were able to basically bring in the views that close that gap from what I was going to get naturally to my goal of over 1 million. So it was successful in that regard. And in my particular instance, I think they were good. Now, the interesting twist is I didn't think that my 4 campaigns were going to be enough to get me across the finish line. And I thought I might have to do a 5th campaign before things were over. And that's when something weird happened. So my campaign, the last few days of the note-taking award video basically blew up. And so you can see that in this graphic here, that all of a sudden, we had 280,000 views at the end of that campaign. And the reason why is because of Saudi Arabia. So for some reason, and I'll use the term viral for lack of a better term, but for some reason, the video went viral in Saudi Arabia. But it doesn't mean people like the video. In fact, the viewership on that video was just about a minute, where previously it had been almost 4 times that on average. So people were clicking on the video, but they weren't necessarily enjoying it or watching it. But for whatever reason, it just caught on fire. I don't know if someone was sharing it, outside of the Google advertising campaign or not, but that's where all those views came from. So really weird. And by the way, the reason why Saudi Arabia was even part of the countries I was advertising in was because that's what Google had recommended. Previous this ad campaign, I had views from Saudi Arabia, but very few. They're very low down the list of countries that have viewed my videos, maybe a couple thousand. So this was an odd thing that came out of nowhere, but it got me the views I needed. So ultimately, I'm glad I did it, but not quite sure what happened or why. Now, the last thing I want to say around ads is, do I recommend those for other creators? And other people do use ads. I've become much more aware of that, having done my own ad campaigns. And the way you can find that out, by the way, is you just go to you have to do a little bit of research, but you go into someone's channel and you see a channel that's really kind of blown up. You can ask yourself a few questions about that. Ask yourself, well, have they covered this topic before? What are, the most views their videos tend to get? What is their subscriber count? You start factoring those things in, and it starts to become obvious when someone's used an ad campaign to increase ads. So that's just one little tip if you're curious. You don't always know, but you can tell circumstantially whether that might have been the case or not. So you do get views for these ads, but is it worth it? It didn't really do anything to my channel other than specifically increasing my view count. People didn't seem to enjoy the videos because they weren't watching it for very long. There's no evidence that people came back and watched additional videos. It doesn't really do much for revenue. You certainly pay out more than you get in for the viewership. It didn't really impact subscribers. So I guess what I'm saying is, overall, in my very particular circumstance, I'm glad I did the ads because I was at a low point. I was kind of depressed and bummed out. I wasn't going to make my video goal, and I was ready to end the channel at that point. But they didn't do anything else for the channel, and they didn't do anything that helped the channel grow or move forward in any particular real way. So, my recommendation for other YouTubers would be one of two things. Either just don't go to views because they're not worth it, would be one thing. But the other thing is, if you did do views, just spend more time curating, going into the advanced settings and trying to focus on audiences that kind of match your demographics already. because those are people that are more likely to enjoy the content and maybe would branch out into other contents. A wide, I just did the general settings that Google provided, which kind of throws things out there in a very broad setting. And that just wasn't conducive to any fundamental change for the channel. So if you're going to spend the money, just put additional effort into making those views much more tailored to your particular audience or the audience you hope to attract and think you can attract. Then it might make sense. But otherwise, I'd probably avoid ads. Okay, now that I've topped off, let's get to the fun stuff. I've all sorts of graphs and data that I want to share about my channel for the life of the channel. But we're going to start actually with an image. Now, some of you may know that in videos, when I review devices, regardless of what I think about the device, I'm either going to end up using that device or I'm not going to use the device. And only a handful of devices can be used at one point in time. So the other devices go in the drawer. So here's an image of what that drawer looks like. Those are over 25 devices that I've reviewed over the years. And I pull them out from time to time, update the firmware, see if there's anything notable to report on. And that's basically the purpose of that. But those are basically an image of, most of the devices I've reviewed over the course of the channel. But let me share with you this bar graph. This is a really interesting bar graph. Now, this is basically showing views per month from the beginning of the channel through the end of November. And I wonder if you can see the 3-week period in which I did ads. Of course, those are the bars in red. So those skew the data significantly. And you can tell that basically those aren't part of my normal activity. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up this graph. I love this graph. So these are basically, again, views per month, but I've taken out the impact of ads. What I've also added to the graph, however, is little boxes that indicate the device that I reviewed at that time, because there's no question the popularity of my channel ebbed and flowed based on whether a major device was released or not. So the boxes basically indicate why there were certain peaks at certain times during the course of my channel. So what I've marked here of interest is those bars in purple basically are really the time when my channel was the most popular. And it's easy to say why. I think that this was the most exciting period during the time my channel was open. You started off with the release of the Remarkable Paper Pro. Then you had the Viwood's AI paper release. The Note Air 4C was released. And then with a little bit of a short break, then it was the Supernote Manta and the Boox Note Max. These are all really major devices in the e-ink note-taking space, and it's no wonder that views were so elevated. Unfortunately, that turned out to be a very temporary period. Views dropped off after that period, and we haven't seen anything quite like that since. And it may be a while until we see something like that in this industry again. But what I like about this graph is it really does tell the story of the channel, because you can see how the channel really moves based on these different devices. Now, in addition to that, here's kind of a little bit of an interesting breakdown, and this shows basically my videos grouped together in categories. And you can see that reviews, again, are the emphasis of why people watch my channel. And maybe it's the views per video that helps tell that story the most. Almost 6,000 views per review video, where nothing else is really close. And in fact, the editorial video itself is a little propped up by one particular video I filmed, which was on the Remarkable You Can Do Better video on that device. So really, there's a huge gap between the review series videos, which really drove my channel, and other videos that didn't do quite as well. Here's a sense of all the devices that I've reviewed, or at least the companies that I've reviewed. Over 15 manufacturers, over 30 devices in total. Books was number one. I reviewed more books devices. Big Me comes pretty close. And then it kind of drops off from there. Of course, companies like Books and Big Me release a lot more devices. So I think I've reviewed every remarkable Viwoods or Supernote device that was released during the time of my channel. They just didn't release that many devices. And then you can see under the others all the kind of miscellaneous devices that I've reviewed. None of this includes e-ink art, and I reviewed like at least 3 or 4 of those as well. Here's just a breakdown specifically of which devices ultimately have delivered the most views. And you can see Books is 4 of the top 5. It's definitely what drove my channel. And then you can see that all the way down to the bottom. So those are some sense of some of the data for my channel, and it helps, I think, do a good description of what I reviewed and what was popular about my channel. Let's move on from that to talking a little bit about finances. And so I have my financial statement, my income statement for my channel, and I have it here both in total and broken down by year. And as you can see overall, just get to the bottom line, I spent over $22,000 more than I took in on this hobby. So this definitely was a labor of love. And you can see how that breaks down by year. Obviously, devices themselves are the number one reason for that expense. Some people might ask, well, couldn't you have returned your devices? And I didn't really want to do that. I'm not sure you could do that over a long period of time. I think people would get wary of so many returns. Maybe not. But I kept devices also because I wanted them around in case there were reviews or some reason to return to them. And so that's why I ended up keeping them. But that, of course, became a major expense for the channel. Obviously, video equipment is next. Art became a new category this year, and you can see how much I spent on ads, which we talked about in a previous chapter. As it relates to revenue, YouTube revenue is by far where most of my revenue came from. And that's based on viewership, although to a lesser degree, if you subscribe to YouTube, I got a little bit of a cut of that, but that's pretty small. It's mostly ad views. I did have some vendors have me review free devices. I had that from Viwoods. I had that from Big Me and Rare2. I think those are the 3 companies. And so those are the value there. And then again, that affiliate sales is only related to Viwoods. I talked about that in an earlier chapter. Otherwise, I just didn't do affiliate sales. It's just something I didn't feel comfortable with. To be clear, I don't really have a problem with other YouTubers doing affiliate sales. I don't think it fundamentally changes their ability to be objective in their reviews. It just wasn't for me. And so that's why I didn't participate in those. But yeah, that's basically what it was like to run the channel, and it definitely was a bit of a money sink. I think it was worth it. I really look back at the 3 years positively, but it's, again, another great reason why maybe it's a good idea to wrap things up and move on to other things. The last thing I'll share here in terms of data is you can see the breakdown by country. There's over 90 countries that my video has basically been seen in. Obviously English-speaking countries dominate the list, but it's certainly not exclusive to that. Every continent is represented except for Africa. That's the one continent where I didn't see any countries that had viewed my channel, which I was a little surprised at. I wouldn't expect Africa to have a major presence, but I was surprised not to see a single African country amongst the 90 or so that were listed by Google. So that was kind of interesting. I guess the last thing I'll throw out there, a couple little miscellaneous facts about my channel. The average length of my video was just under 25 minutes. My longest video was an hour and 17. That was for the Big Me 1051C visual tour, believe it or not. And the shortest video was when we announced the first E-Team live stream, and that was 37 seconds. So that's the gamut in terms of video length. Average viewing length, if you exclude the ads, which drove this number down, was 5 minutes and 22 seconds. So again, average of almost 25-minute video. People generally watched maybe a little over a fifth of that. Oh, those are some stats about my channel. Okay, so I thought I might take a few moments just to talk about, what would I have done differently? And let's say that the channel had continued. What would I do differently to grow? And I think one thing I might look into is I might look into more formalized scripting. So the way that I did my channel is I did a lot of preparation on what I would say, but I always did it in an outline format. And then a lot of times I would practice in my head what that would look like or go over some of the key points about it. And I think that I think I might come across a little bit stronger, a little bit tighter, a little more concise if I had done scripting with a teleprompter. So that's something I think I definitely would have tried to see how that would have gone. Of course, I would have continued to work on the craft, right? I would have continued to work on lighting and sound and production in particular. A lot of things there I could have mined to be better. I always felt like that I delivered the content I wanted to deliver. Like the actual substance was always there, but the packaging of it are the things that I would have probably improved on. But I also want to go through a quick mental exercise here and basically say, okay, you've done the channel. Let's say that you have the opportunity to do it again, knowing the experience that I've gone through, knowing the approach and how that plays out and all that sort of thing. But I get a chance to hit the reset button. What would I do? And what would I do differently in particular? And I think that I'm very proud of the way I did. I want to be clear. I'm looking back and I'm glad that I did the channel the way that I wanted to. But having had that experience already and doing it again a second time, I probably would have changed perspective in terms of my customer. So instead of having the viewer as my customer, as the person I was thinking of when I'm making the videos, I probably would have had manufacturers as my customer. And the reason why I say that is just simply because it would have been a dramatically different experience. I would have had a closer relationships with the companies. I probably would have gotten better deals. I might have gotten devices in advance of being released, stuff like that. There would have been opportunities with that approach that I didn't have the way that I did it. Again, I'm glad I did it the way I did it. If I had to start over and I didn't have my experience, I would do it the way I did it. But if I want to do something different and see what the impact of that is, I think that would be the main change. I would whore myself out to companies, basically, because that would be a completely different experience. And in some ways wouldn't be as nearly a big of a struggle at times as it was the way that I pursued the channel. So I think that's kind of what I would do. But again, I'm pretty glad things worked out the way they did. Okay, so I thought we might take some time, since we're wrapping everything up, to talk about influences on the channel. And there were a few folks that I think are worth calling out for their impact on me and what ended up being my channel. And we'll start with Kit Betts Masters. Now, I have to say that before I started my channel, I really enjoyed his channel. I don't think he was as direct of an influence as others were. Simply because his style is so unique, and I just think that there's something about what he did that I didn't see myself emulating. But we actually have very similar perspectives. He used to provide data to a website called eWritable, and we'll get to that in just a second. But basically, they would have these spider graphs, and they'd have these different axes, and he would have the different devices. You can select them and compare devices. It was pretty cool, actually. And I remember thinking, devices that I reviewed, that he had reviewed as well, thinking that we would almost always be either, if not exact, within 1 point of each other, sometimes 2 points on a rare occasion. But we had a lot of overlap, if you can imagine a Venn diagram, in terms of how we felt about devices. So we were very similar in terms of our perspectives on that. Kit was an early subscriber to my channel. So I started my channel in April of 2023. I think he signed up as a subscriber in July of 2023. And that was a big deal to me. I have to be forthright about that. I remember telling my wife how excited I was that he had subscribed. He did reach out to me a few times trying to connect. It never happened for whatever reason. I think that's probably a good thing. I wasn't avoiding him, but I do think he's best as a solo producer and creator. So I don't know if our collaboration would have been that great anyway. But nevertheless, I do want to share a story that I would have said had we collaborated. So Kit, this story is for you. Now, many people are probably not aware, but Kit is a Manchester United fan. That's a soccer club, obviously in Manchester. And you probably don't know this, but I am an Arsenal fan. I've been an Arsenal fan, that's a team that plays in London, since the late 90s. So we're natural rivals. And in particular, Manchester and Arsenal were really big rivals back in the late 90s, early noughts between Wenger and Alex Ferguson. Those years, there's a big rivalry there. I have to admit, Manchester got a little bit of the better of the two, particularly in terms of their European success. But Arsenal was right there with them, earned a number of titles, league and FA Cup titles. Anyway, so the first trip, this is the story. The first trip I ever took outside the United States, I traveled to London, and I actually ended up seeing Arsenal play. That's one of the reasons why I ended up picking them as my team. And I came the day before match day, got my tickets. There was a match that was coming up in the Coca-Cola Cup, which I think is now called the Carling Cup. And it was Arsenal versus Birmingham City. Arsenal ended up winning in extra time, but that's a story for another time. But anyway, I get my tickets that day, and I decide to go down to the clubhouse. This is back when they were in Highbury. So the clubhouse is basically on the corner of their campus. And so I went down there. It's this nondescript building. You go inside, and there's this kind of crowded room with people and a counter. And so your goal is just to kind of slowly make your way up to that counter. You order your stuff, grab it, and you get out of there. So it took me a while, but we got to the counter. I ordered a jersey, and then I noticed this old woman, by old, I mean probably in her 70s, let's say, and she ordered floor mats. Now, we were sitting there in the counter for a few minutes. And remember, this is my first time outside the country. I thought, why don't I strike up a conversation? So I turned to her, and I said, hey, it's too bad that those floor mats don't have the Manchester United logo, because then you can stomp on them. And without missing a beat, she turned to me and said, I couldn't tell you what I'd do to them. And that kind of ended our conversation. I always thought that was a fun story, and it was a story I was hoping to reveal if we did end up meeting. We didn't, but there's the story nonetheless. Anyway, Kit, thank you. You've been a great supporter, and I'll continue to be enjoying your work. Keep it coming. Now, a good friend of Kit's is this man named Dan, who maintains a site called ewritable.com. And you should check that site out, particularly if you want to do comparison tables and you want to get a sense of what's out there and the different features. It's really the best website out there for e-ink note-taking. Even this year, I still go back and use it as a resource as I do some of my preparatory work for some of my videos. So early on, I actually coordinated with Dan. I did a little bit of freelance work for him. I was doing it for free, but he ended up giving me a little bit of money. So I'm appreciative of that. But more than anything, I really enjoyed working with him. I've enjoyed his website. So I wanted to do a big shout out to Dan as well. The last person that I want to highlight, of course, is the godfather of the e-ink note-taking space, which is Voya from My Deep Guide. And I would say, if anybody, Voya probably inspired my channel the most. I really looked at the stuff that he did, and there's a couple things that I kind of came away with. One is I felt like it was something that I could do as well, that I could kind of emulate at least some of what he was doing. I didn't ever intend to be a Voya clone, but I felt like the manner in which he went about it was something that I could do as well, and his channel really inspired my channel as a result. I also thought that even though I liked Voya's channel a lot, and he really was the one that brought me on to Supernote, there was nobody else talking about Supernote, so it was his channel that brought me on that. And as many of you know, I've used a Supernote as my daily driver for almost 3 years. I'm back to books, but still, Supernote was my number one for a long time. So that's thanks to his channel. But I also thought that as much as I respected the work he was doing, and I liked it, and still do, there was a need for other voices as well. There was a need for other perspectives. So his channel really was the impetus on many dimensions for what ended up being my channel. But ultimately, a thank you to Voya as well for being that inspiration, and I really appreciate it, so thank you. I do want to call out, though, what I call the cult of Voya. And I want to start off here and be very clear. I hold Voya completely harmless for this phenomenon that I term the cult of Voya. In fact, and well, let me pause for a second. So what I mean by the cult of Voya, these are people who are on other social media, YouTube or Reddit, and basically they cite Voya as if he is the only authority in the area of e-ink note-taking. Now, we all know that Voya is a good authority on e-ink note-taking, very well respected. I think most of us can agree on that, if not all. But the authority? Now, there was one video, I'll show as an example of why I don't think Voya has anything to do with these people ultimately, where I saw Voya, he did a review, it was a first impressions review, and his verbiage was very clear about what he was saying, what the implications were, and what he wasn't saying. The last being critical. And then I saw on a Reddit post, a response to some other's post, not mine, basically quoting Voya, I think misquoting ultimately, and saying, well, this is what Voya said, therefore that's the way it is. And that's not what Voya said in this particular example. Voya was clear, he had some initial impressions, there were some caveats he was throwing. All that nuance that Voya said was lost when this cultist posted on Reddit. And I guess my message to those, and I doubt anybody who's watching this video would be what I consider part of the cult, is give it a rest. We all know Voya is great. We can all watch our videos for ourselves. If you've got your own opinion, please feel free to share it. If Voya said something you think might be of interest, a reference is still fine. But Voya's word is not the end all. Nobody's is. And honestly, I still see posts, not as bad as it used to be, by the way, but I still see posts where people are basically, cutting off a conversation on Reddit that someone may have posted, basically saying, well, this is what Voya said. And it's like, come on, guys, just get a life, okay? Anyway, so those are three inspirations to the channel between Kit, Dan, and Voya, which I want to thank, and my message to the cultist of Voya to, tone it down a bit. All right, guys. Okay. Anyway, that's those are my influences, and they really had a big impact on my channel. So I thought it would be good to reflect on what life is going to be like without my YouTube channel. Because as I said earlier in the video, there's two things of note. One, there's a status to having a YouTube channel. When my channel closes and if I decide to post something on Reddit, I don't know that I will, but let's say that I do, it's not going to have the same traction. It's going to get buried again, just like it was before I started my video. So I'm going to lose a lot of status there. And also, I'm going to have a major, hole in my life. The amount of time I spent not just recording and editing and producing videos, but thinking about it and preparing for it and kind of ruminating on what I was working on or what I wanted to work on. These took major portions of my life. Every day I thought about my channel, and that's going to go away. So it's going to be a big deal, and I'm not pretending otherwise. It's going to be a big hole in my life. But on the other hand, it's also a big world out there, and there's just so many other things that I can do. And I don't know what that thing is going to be. I don't know what's going to fill my time. Am I going to do more reading or video games, or am I going to take up, go back to writing, which is a hobby that I've enjoyed in the past, or am I going to take on a brand new hobby? I don't know what I'm going to do. But I know that it's a big world out there, and I'll find a way to fill it. So yes, I'm giving up a lot, but there's always tomorrow, and there's always a new day, and that's what I'm looking forward to now. So that's it. We've reached the end of my final video. I want to start off by thanking you. I know the only people watching this video are the people that were there for a long portion of my time in this channel, and the people that subscribed early and supported me. And I just wanted to thank you. You guys were there when I needed you, and I really appreciate that. I ask you to sign my yearbook. The comments of this video will basically be my yearbook, and please write in there, how my channel might have affected you, or what you liked about it, or what you didn't like about it. It's your opportunity to basically come in and say what you want about the channel. I'm going to heart the messages that I've read, so you'll know when you see that heart that I've read your message, regardless of how I feel about it. But I'm not going to respond. It's time for this voice to fall silent. I've been a voice in this industry for almost 3 years now, and the time has come to no longer be a voice. And that's something that I've accepted and that I plan to make permanent. So I'm not going to respond to any comments. I'm just going to listen, because that's where I am now in my career, and my journey is listening. And I'm looking forward to listening to your comments. So please sign that yearbook. I would much appreciate it. Anyway, thank you very much. And I hope you have a wonderful life.